Yo, what is up guys? In this video, I'm gonna be explaining how to bet on futures with an edge, how to bet on future bets. So futures, it doesn't mean anything complicated, right? It just means betting on an event in the future, like an MVP winner, the Super Bowl winner, the World Series winner. These are all called futures. And the thing you need to know about futures is they're multi-way markets, right? If you think about an NBA money line, you can bet on either the Thunder or the Pacers. There's two teams that can win. Whereas in the Super Bowl, it's a little more complicated because there's dozens of teams that could potentially win the Super Bowl. So the math gets a little more hairy. So in this video, I'm gonna explain how to bet on futures with a mathematical edge and make money. And I'm actually gonna go through a bet I just locked in on DraftKings. I tried to bet $1,000 on it, but they limited me to only 66 bucks, and it's the Bengals to win the AFC Championship at plus 950. So we're kind of gonna go through the math. I'm gonna, use examples as a way to break down futures bets. A couple things I wanted to mention first is I don't bet on futures almost ever, right? I'm doing this video because a lot of people have asked, how do futures work? How do I find an edge in multi-way markets where there's various outcomes that could win? So I decided to do a video kind of breaking down the math. However, there's two reasons that I strongly don't like and recommend to people avoid futures. The first thing is sportsbooks charge a ton of juice. They really juice up their markets. So the examples we're gonna go through today, if you look at the World Series, whatever, the typical hold or juice that sportsbooks charge is over 20%, right? 15%, 20%. It's usually very, very high. Compare that to point spread bets, right? Where usually most sports books set point spreads and totals at minus 110, minus 110 odds. For point spread bets, the hold on the sports books, the juice that they're baking into the market is only about, 5% compared to futures where they're baking in a ton more juice. Sports books juice the crap out of multi-way markets, especially futures. So that's the first reason I don't really bet on futures is there's not a lot of value usually because sportsbooks are juicing the crap out of their markets. The second reason I don't bet on futures is probably a little bit obvious, but you're just tying up money for a long period of time, right? So let's say we're currently in June. It was just my mom's birthday. Comment happy birthday to my mom, and that'd be awesome. But anyways, it's currently June. If I bet on the Super Bowl winner, even if I find a bet with a 5% ROI and I bet $1,000 on it, my bet has a $50 edge. I'm betting $1,000. I think my bet has a 5% ROI. So I'm making $50 in EV, but I'm not gonna get that money back for months and months and months, right? Like 8 months away is the Super Bowl. On the other hand, if you can find an MLB bet tonight with a 5% edge, that's obviously much better because you're gonna compound much quicker. Even if you just have a 1% ROI on your straight bets, let's say you're betting $1,000 every single day on the MLB. There's MLB games every single day. So if you're betting $1,000 a day on the MLB with a 1% ROI, every single day you're making $10 in projected profit. There's 30 days in a month. Over the course of the month, you're making $30 in EV, right? $10 per day, 30 days total. Every bet you place settles by the end of that night. So you're getting daily compounding. On the other hand, for futures, even if you have a bet that's a 10% ROI, you're probably gonna make more money just finding profitable straight bets that are gonna settle a lot quicker. Time value of money, you don't wanna tie up money for long periods of time. So, that is why personally, I don't bet on futures that often. But without further ado, let's get into the math behind futures bets, and I'll kind of show you why this play on the Bengals to win the AFC Championship is a sharp, profitable bet on DraftKings at plus 950. So just like everything else, making money sports betting on futures, it's about finding value, finding bets with an edge. And the first thing you have to do, I mean, you always have to do this, is line shop. You need to make sure you're getting the best possible odds on whatever play you lock in. So for example, if you want to bet on the Bills to win the AFC Championship, you definitely should not be betting them plus 320 on Caesars. You're going to get killed if you're not line shopping and you're only using one sports book. DraftKings has the Bills at plus 350. So basically, even if you don't use DraftKings and you only use Caesars, DraftKings is telling you, just by the fact that they're giving you better odds than Caesars, that, hey, Caesars is ripping you off. Right? And obviously getting ripped off is a surefire way to get absolutely crushed. Sports betting long term, everything we're going to be discussing in this video is data-driven sports betting. However, let's take a look at Bengals plus 950, right? You can see DraftKings is offering the best odds. Sharp books like Circa. Circa is known to be a very sharp book. They're only giving you plus 775 on the Bengals. So we're getting 175 cents of improvement, plus 950 on DraftKings relative to Circa. And then Pinnacle, which is also known to be another really sharp book, they're only giving you plus 624 on the Bengals. So it seems like DraftKings is offering, pretty good value, but how do we determine if this bet is profitable enough or if we're getting enough value to justify betting the Bengals at plus 950? Does this bet have an edge or does it not have an edge? Right? I think we can all agree if we could get the Bengals to win the AFC Championship, I mean, they have Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, right? If we could get the Bengals at plus 10,000, that would be an obvious no-brainer. However, how do we determine is plus 950? Is that a profitable bet, a plus EV bet, or is that a negative EV bet? Is that an unprofitable bet? So let's get into the math right now. So now we're going to get into the math behind futures betting. I promise you it looks really complicated, but it's not. It's actually pretty simple. So again, the Bengals plus 950 is the bet I decided to bet. So all of sports betting revolves around getting an edge, getting a bet above fair value. So for example, if the Bengals should be priced, if they're fair line, they should be priced at, let's say, plus 800, then plus 950 would be a profitable bet, a positive EV bet. On the other hand, if the Bengals are fair at, let's say, plus 1,000, plus 950 is below fair value, it would be a negative EV bet. So I said this earlier, but for two-way markets, de-vigging is very simple. So for example, Circa is known to be a really sharp book. You can see they have a 28-cent spread, Nationals plus 212, Mets minus 240. So they have 28 cents of juice baked into their market. So what you can do is just use, I always say, this is the most important calculator in sports betting, and it really is a no-vig odds calculator, de-vigs the market. And what this basically tells you, this is the fair line. The Nationals should be priced at plus 220 and the Mets should be priced at minus 220. So if you could get the Nationals above fair value, let's say, plus 250, your bet would be profitable, positive EV, whereas Nationals at plus 210 would be negative EV. Similarly, if you could get the Mets at minus 200, that would be a profitable bet, plus EV. On the other hand, getting the Mets at minus 230 is negative EV. Obviously, Circa's only one data point. You also want to consider other sharp books like Pinnacle. So you can see Pinnacle's market right here. Pinnacle is known to be another book that is pretty sharp, has pretty accurate lines. But anyways, for futures, it's more complicated to de-vig the market and figure out fair value because it's a multi-way market. There's tons of different teams that could win the AFC. And the reason I like to use multiple sports books when de-vigging is sometimes there's big discrepancies. So even between sharp books like Pinnacle and Circa, you can see the Patriots are 42-1, bigger underdogs, much bigger underdogs on Circa compared to Pinnacle. So that's why I like to consider two sharp books when I'm de-vigging the market. So basically what I did here is I just put in the Circa and Pinnacle odds, and then I converted those odds into the implied win probability, right? So basically, if you go to an odds converter calculator, every odd just represents a probability. Every odd has an associated probability. So I'll give you a simple example. If a team is a plus 200 underdog, that just means the sportsbook is telling you they're plus 200, 2-to-1 underdogs, or a third to win, right? They're gonna win the game 1 out of 3 times. So 33.3%. Plus 200, 2-to-1 underdog. Similarly, minus 300 is a 3-to-1 favorite, 3/4 to win, 75% to win. So all I'm doing here is converting the odds into probability. So for example, the Bills are plus 275 on Circa. Pinnacle has them as much bigger underdogs. So plus 275 means they're 26.67%. That is the probability Circa is letting you bet at, right? So if you think the Bills are only 20% to win the AFC Championship, then placing this bet on Circa at plus 275 would be negative EV. Right? 26% is the probability, 26.67 is the probability you break even at Circa. So on the other hand, if you think the Bills are 40%, right, then placing a bet on the Bills anywhere at plus 275 or whatever would be a profitable bet. You're getting above the implied probability. So basically what you can do is sum the implied probabilities, right? So I did this for both Circa as well as Pinnacle, right? The probability of each team winning the AFC Championship. And what you're going to notice is both of these sum to approximately 120%, which doesn't make any sense, right? These are all the teams in the AFC. One of these teams has to win the AFC Championship. So these implied probabilities should sum to 100%. But again, the books are baking in the VIG, the juice, however you want to think about it. They're baking in a profit margin, which is called their hold. Hold is the same as the VIG or the juice the books are charging. So because the books, right, because the sum of implied probabilities is greater than 1, that is basically represents the VIG or the juice the sports books are charging, which is a little higher on Pinnacle. Pinnacle's charging 17% hold, Circa 16%, 15.99%. So basically what that means is if you bet, $100 on futures on Circa on the NFL AFC Championship, Circa is expecting to profit 16%. Right? So for every, $1,000 bet on the AFC Championship on Circa, they're making a profit margin of approximately 16%. And on Pinnacle, again, it's a little bit higher. So then what you can do is basically just normalize, right? This is supposed to sum, right, to 100% on both books. So what you can do is normalize, right? Basically find the odds, equally where these numbers would go to 100%. That's called normalizing or devigging the market. And that gets you the fair price, the fair odds. So basically, if I devig or normalize Circa's market, they're saying the Bills are fair at plus 346. So basically, if you could get the Bills to win the AFC Championship on a different book, maybe DraftKings, like you can see right here, if you could get the Bills above plus 346, according to Circa's market, once the juice is removed, right? Circa's only giving you plus 275 on the Bills to win, but once you remove the juice, the fair line with the VIG removed is plus 346, 0.39, whatever. So basically, Circa is saying if you can get the Bills above plus 346, you have a profitable bet. The Bills to win the AFC Championship. On the other hand, if you can only get the Bills plus 320, that would be an unprofitable bet, a negative EV bet, according to Circa's market. So as an example, based on Circa's market, DraftKings and FanDuel offering the Bills at plus 350, that is plus EV to Circa's market devigged. However, Pinnacle has the Bills as bigger underdogs. So even though plus 350 is profitable to Circa's market because we're getting above fair value, if you devig Pinnacle, the fair line is plus 435, right? Because Pinnacle has the Bills as much bigger underdogs. So once you devig it, the Bills are fair plus 435. So getting them at plus 350 on DraftKings or FanDuel is a very small, edge to Circa's market, very slightly plus EV, but according to Pinnacle's market, it's super unprofitable, super negative EV. And that's why I recommend devigging your markets to multiple sharp books like Circa as well as Pinnacle. So then what you can do, right, once you have the fair price according to both sports books, is just take a weighted average. So basically, if I take a weighted average of Circa and Pinnacle, the fair line on Bills to win the AFC Championship, it's plus 391. There's no sports book offering above plus 391 on the Bills to win the championship, so there's no profitable bet. However, if I do the same thing for the Bengals, right, if I devig both Pinnacle and Circa's market, Circa, right, they have the Bengals as slightly bigger underdogs, plus 775 relative to Pinnacle, plus 624. However, if I devig, both Pinnacle as well as Circa and take a weighted average, like you can see right here, and I can just kind of highlight this in green. According to the weighted average of the two sharpest sports books, Pinnacle and Circa, the fair price on the Bengals should be plus 855. Now, granted, I'm only devigging to two sports books. Realistically, if you wanted to create a really good, profitable model for betting on futures, you should consider more sports books, right? Every sports book is a data point. So I'm only considering the two sharpest books, but if you wanted to, you could add in a bunch of different sports books, devig their markets, take a weighted average. Maybe you weight in your, weighted average. Maybe Pinnacle and Circa are 30%, and then some other sports books like FanDuel are less, only 10%. So you can do something like that. Take a weighted average where each book has a different weight depending on how sharp it is. But again, this is a very rudimentary model example. So if I take a weighted average of the fair line, right, for the Bengals, they should be priced at plus 855 approximately. On DraftKings, we're getting plus 950 above fair value, Circa and Pinnacle's devigged markets, the weighted average. So this bet on DraftKings would be profitable, positive EV. After you remove the juice, the 16% profit margin that Pinnacle and Circa are baking into their markets, this bet on DraftKings still looks incredibly good. So again, every odd has an associated probability. So the Bengals are plus 855. Basically, that's the fair price once you devig Pinnacle and Circa. So what you can do is basically take their odds, plus 855, and plug it in to an odds converter calculator. Again, every odd has an associated probability. If a team is a plus 900 underdog, they're a 9-1 underdog, 10% to win according to the market. So basically, plus 855 is a little more than 10%, 10.47%. That is the probability, according to Pinnacle and Circa with the VIG removed. This is the probability that the Bengals win the AFC Championship. And you want to put weight into these sharp books. They're experts in setting lines, multi-billion-dollar companies, experts in setting lines. They have teams of data scientists. They're taking bets, adjusting their odds based on where action's coming in. So, long story short, this bet is profitable on DraftKings, right? Plus 950 is plus EV to Pinnacle and Circa's market devigged. But then what I can do is just back out what is the profit margin of my bet. So again, DraftKings limited me to only like $66, but let's just say for the sake of round numbers, $100. Let's say I bet that. $100 on the Bengals to win the AFC Championship at plus 950. I'm betting 100 to profit 950. Again, the fair win percentage, the probability that the Bengals win The AFC Championship is right here, 10.47%. So what that means is 10.47% of the time, I'm going to win. The Bengals are going to win the AFC Championship, and I'm going to profit $950. The other 89.5% of the time, so this is just, you can see the formula here. 1 minus the win percentage would be the loss percentage. The other 89.5% of the time, I'm going to lose my stake of $100. 10.5% of the time, approximately, I'm winning $950 in profit. 89.5% of the time, I'm losing $100. So from there, you can just kind of figure out your edge pretty easily, right? Like, it's not that complicated. 10.47% of the time, you're going to win $950. The other percent of the time, you're going to lose $100, your stake. So your edge would be 986. This bet would have a 9.8% ROI or 9.86% ROI. So if you bet $1,000, your edge would be 9860. $10,000, $986. Now again, this model isn't perfect because we're only considering 2 sports books, Pinnacle and Circa, and we're weighting them equally. But I'll put this sheet below. This is how you devig futures markets. And if you have any questions, comment them below. Again, I love making sports betting content. I love doing this type of stuff. So let me know any questions you have below, and sub to the channel. Thanks so much, guys. Hopefully you found this video helpful. How to, back out fair value from futures markets, find bets with an edge, stuff like that.